In this fifth tutorial where we're working on our outdoor scene, I'm going to go over lighting. So I'll go over how to import an animated HDRI, a still HDRI, how to work with the Redshift sun and sky rig, and all of the different lighting options that are unique to the outdoors. So I'm really excited to go over that with you, and I'll also cover where you can find some HDRIs for your own project. And I really hope you enjoy it. So if you want to learn more about HDRIs, you can also always look it up in the Maxon User Manual. They are high dynamic range images, and HDRIs are ideal for use in a combination with GI to recreate a very natural and realistic lighting situations. So this is an example of reflections with an HDRI and reflections without an HDRI to give you an idea. It creates some really nice realism in reflections, so that's what we're going to be doing. Some things I'd like to point out to you of where you can get HDRIs. I got mine from my Fused subscription with Insidium. They have a lot of different options. They have both still HDRIs as well as animated HDRIs. And you can definitely check this out. I'm just on their website. If you go under products, 3D resource packs, and just scroll down, you can see the 360 skies, and you can view all the thumbnails of them and see what options there are. So that's one option. You can find HDRIs on here. In HDRI Haven, you can browse HDRIs, and there's a lot of really great options in here. So this is another place where you can find some HDRIs for your scene. There's also interior, so if you're lighting something that's indoors, you can do that. There's also a lot of great outdoor scenes that you can use. So I wanted to show you this also as an option. So now that we're in Cinema 4D, you can go up to Window, Asset Browser, and just type in HDRI, and you'll see all the free HDRIs that come with Cinema 4D, and there's some really great options. And that might save you some money to just use the default ones that are available. It's totally up to you, but I just want to show you some places to get HDRIs. I've already lit my scene, so I'll go ahead and open it. You can see an example of how I've lit this animation here, and I added the HDRI to a dome light, a Redshift dome light. I was working in Redshift for this, but you can do this in Octane too, whatever you prefer. So where you find the Redshift lights is under Redshift light, and then you can select dome light. I'm going to turn off this other dome light for right now just to show you how to do this. If you have an animated texture you would like to import here, what you can do is go under texture and click these three dots, and then it'll allow you to open it up in your browser. So I'm going to select this morning texture, all the frames, and I'm going to click open. And if you click this arrow right next to the texture, it's easy to miss, but if you click that, you'll see more options. So if you want this to not just have a single image, you can click animation, and then you'll see more options coming up. So if you noticed when I uploaded that image file, is that it was a frame, and there were hundreds of frames in sequence, and they were all named sequentially with a number afterwards so that Cinema 4D can find them and have them play in order. And because of that, we can go ahead and decide that we want this sky animation to loop because we have frames, so it doesn't have to be a still image. So I'll click loop. You can also pick simple. Simple, if you choose simple, what that'll do is just play it once. If you choose loop, it'll just keep playing it from beginning to end, beginning to end. Ping pong, it'll go from beginning to end to beginning, beginning to end to beginning. So you have some options. Off, it'll just be like a still image like most HDRIs are. And if you hit detect frames, it'll go ahead and find all the frames in that folder for that animation, and it's able to do that by how you name it. So it usually has the name and then the number, and that's how it finds those. And right now it says start frame 0 and frame 0, frame rate 30, so you can choose your frame rate in here. I'll hit detect frames, and now it says 0 is the start frame and the end frame is now 599. So we have 599 frames, and you can select your frame rate. I suggest having it match the rest of your animation. In your render settings, you can adjust your frame rate by clicking this button here and opening up your render settings, and then go into output and then select your frame rate in here. But you need to do more than that. You also need to go into your project settings and select the frame rate in there, because those settings only affect the render, but they won't affect what you see in your viewport. So if you click Command D, here are our project settings. That's the hotkey for that. Again, Command D opens up project settings. Remember that, it's handy. And here you can see your frames per second, and you can adjust that here. I'm going to keep mine 30 because that works well for me. And then everything matches. And we've also already cached these with 30 frames per second. So that's how I'm going to keep it. You can make adjustments if you want your scene to be different. And I'll go back to our dome light here. You can adjust. I'm actually just going to single out this dome light. So if I press this button here, viewport solo, we're only going to be able to see that dome light because that's what we have selected. And I'll hit render. So there we are, and you can see that if I move it some frames ahead, it will re-render, and you'll see that it looks different. So it really is animating. Those clouds just moved. I'll put it back at the beginning. You can adjust the intensity of your HDRI. So it just got a little bit lighter. You can adjust your exposure. You can make your sky darker, you can make it lighter. If you want to set these back to default, let's say if you just totally screw them up and you don't like it, right click on the arrow and it sets it back to the default. So that's a helpful thing to be aware of. You can actually change what kind of light this is in here. I'm going to keep it a dome light. You can choose if your light shows up in the background. So let's say you just want the reflections from an HDRI, but you don't want to have to deal with all that other, with it showing up in the background. You can turn this off. And now it won't show up in the background anymore. But you could put something else in the background if you want that to show, and just keep the reflections from the HDRI. So that's a nice way to light a scene as well. That's an option. You can choose to cover up your HDRI with a back plate. So let's say you wanted to choose another image, you could do that in here. Click these three dots, find an image, that'll be your background, and that will cover up the HDRI. And you can choose something else for the back plate. It's, think of it as in photography when you have a backdrop, it's just a background. You can choose whatever you want, and if you choose to do that, you have control over the exposure, hue, saturation, and gamma of that image. So you can adjust that in there if you don't want to have to deal with doing that in post. So that's those controls. Under details, you have a lot more control. How is this affecting your scene? If you only want this light from the dome light or your HDRI to affect the diffuse, you can adjust all of these sliders and it'll change it. If you wanted to, you can choose how much this is affecting the reflections in your scene, how much this is affecting transmission, how much this is affecting scattering, volume, global illumination. So let's say you have some volume objects in your scene, but you really want those to only be lit by some other small lights, like you could say you only want them to be lit by a redshift area light, and you don't want this HDRI to affect the volume, you can take that volume all the way down here and only have it affect the volume. So you have a lot of control in here. You can choose what objects you'd like to exclude from being controlled by this light. So if you just want your dome light to affect certain things in your scene, you can do that and exclude others. And just as you can exclude things, you can choose what to include. And you can switch that setting around. We have nothing we're including, so now it just looks dark. I'll turn it back to exclude. But that is basically how you make an HDRI, and that was the main way that I had lit the scene in the final animation you've seen in this tutorial that we're working on. The HDRI was my main way of lighting. I did composite the animation in post so that I could composite the background in separately from the foreground. So the tree and the plants, they were on a separate layer inside of After Effects, then the background, the HDRI. So that's how you do that. It's up to you, it's your project. You can have it be an animated HDRI, you can have it be a non-animated HDRI, you can throw a backplate in there, do whatever you want. It's your way of learning is by experimenting and trying to do something different. So I think you learn more when you don't copy what I'm doing exactly and you make it your own and do your own project, your own creative spin on it. So that's what I would suggest. But that basically covers the HDRIs. I'm going to stop this render preview, Redshift render view. I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to unhide the viewport solo. Something else you can use, which is pretty cool to light your scene if you want to, is a Redshift physical sun. And another really cool option that I'm actually going to show in a new project file is we could also use a Redshift sun and sky rig. So this is incredibly powerful. I'll bring back the Redshift render view. It's hiding somewhere. Here it is. And I'll hit play. I'm actually gonna have this lean up a little bit more first and then hit play. And now you can see a little bit more of our sky. So now we have this pretty low res, but it gives you an idea of what's happening. In our Redshift sky, you'll see that we have in our hierarchy a Redshift sun. And here we have a few options. If you click on Redshift sky, you can see we have the basic properties, coordinates, sky, sun, and override. So under sky, you can choose the intensity of the light. So that'll adjust that. You can choose what kind of lighting model you would like. These are just two options you can choose from. If you'd like to adjust the ground color, like let's say instead of gray, we want this to be green, you can do that. And now if I create a preview, you'll see that it's green. Okay, so you can see that we were able to change the ground color. You can change it to whatever you want. That seems a little light. I'm going to make it a darker green. You can also choose what color the night sky is. And here, the same way. And you can even use this option here. You can affect the hue, saturation, and value of the color of the sky. Same thing for in here. So those options are all available to you. You can adjust the turbidity. So the sky looks a little bit bluer if the turbidity is turned down, and it looks more hazy and white if it's turned up. I'm going to set this back to default by right-clicking on the arrow. You can also affect how much ozone is in the sky. So if I turn this all the way down, you can see how that affects it. And again, I can turn this all the way up. So it's a little bit of a subtle change, but it's something worth trying. I'm going to place this back to default. You can choose the horizon height. You can lower it down, and then you can lower it back up again. So you can choose where the horizon is. Maybe I'll make it a little bit lower right now. Not that low though. By rotating it, you can actually get a sunset. So you can actually see the sun go down, which is kind of cool. So you can even animate that. So that's a pretty cool sunset. And we have some other controls in here. You can adjust how sharp the shadows are. If you click on Redshift Sun, and here you can adjust that. You can also adjust the transparency of the shadows. So if you're lighting something in particular, you can see that. And you have the typical controls that you'd have in a light, like what we talked before with the HDRIs. You can control the diffuse, reflection, transmission, scattering, global illumination, and volume, and even caustic. So you have complete control over those. If you go under project, you can choose what to have affected by the sun and what to not have affected by the sun. You can have this in either exclude mode and drag objects into here that you would like to exclude from being affected by the sun. You can also choose what you would like to include, which is the reverse, and drag what you'd like to include into here. So you do have a few options in regards to what you light and how you light it. If we click on Redshift Sky, let me make sure that I covered everything in here. You can adjust the color by red and blue shift. So you can make this more red, you can make this more blue. You can also control the saturation. So maybe if you're on another planet, you can make the sky a little bit more red. Maybe it has a different atmosphere. And you can take down the saturation some too. So you have complete control over how your sky looks. Like maybe this is a cool alien planet sky. You can do whatever you'd like. And also experiment with the different models you can have the sunlight in. For the sun, you can adjust the scale of the sun. You can make it small, you can make it big. So you can do that with the sun disk scale. You can adjust the glow intensity. So that's the glow around the disk that's representing the sun. So you can make that however intense as you'd like, or remove it completely. You can adjust the sun disk intensity, so that's how bright that disk is. You can make it more subtle if you'd like. So there's tons of controls in here. You can even make it nighttime if you want. And there are some overrides like reflection intensity, refraction, and that just controls all of that. But I hope that you found this helpful. If you added in a Redshift sky and a sun, but you want to remove the physical sun, you can do that also, but then you'll lose that extra sun detail. And what that pretty much does is just delete the sun out of the sun and sky rig. These do actually come as two separate objects. If you want, you can just add a Redshift sky, or you could add just a Redshift sun or physical sun. But this is really nice because if you adjust the sun, the sky adjusts to it. So it's a nice control, and you could do something like that if you don't want to use an HDRI. I just wanted to give you some more lighting options. You can also use area lights if you have lights in your scene. For a lot of outdoor situations, I end up using HDRIs or Redshift sky and sun. You could use an HDRI and drop in a sun and use them together, but I just want to go over some of the things you can do so that you can really make this project your own. There's a lot of amazing controls, and I hope this is helpful to you. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one where we'll cover materials.